Hi, this is BJ Lawson, and we're here taking the pulse of the war on drugs with Mike Smithson. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks. I'm glad you were able to meet up with me.
Tell me a little bit about your organization.
LEAP was founded in 2002 by 5 cops. They had been talking about this for many years.
Okay.
Over a cup of coffee.
Hey.
Bowl there, a cup here. They've been talking for years about this, just like we're doing right now, over a diner or over at a bar having a beer, and just saying how everything they were doing wasn't making any kind of a difference. Sure, they were padding a lot of huge numbers with arresting and convicting and sending people to prison. But over the decades of all their work, they were seeing that drugs were becoming more potent, more available. They were cheaper, and we were building this huge prison system.
Wow.
So they decided we're going to give a public face to law enforcement, and we're going to offer law enforcement an opportunity to step out. And that's exactly what happened. So in 2002 they formed. We very quickly became a membership organization of more than 500. It grew to 1,200, 5,000. We're now over 10,000 members in just a little over 5 years. In fact, we've doubled our membership in the last 18 months.
Wow. And what does LEAP stand for again?
Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
Against
And it was
Prohibition.
important, yes, it was important for us to use the word prohibition in our name, because most people don't think of the war on drugs as drug prohibition. Plus, we wanted to show the significance, compare it to alcohol prohibition, of course, of the 20s.
Sure.
And so it was important to have that. A significant change that the organizational management, the board of directors right at the beginning made, was we were going to open this up to civilians as well. Civilians could join us. You didn't have to have law enforcement experience to be a member. But to speak for LEAP, you had to be involved in the criminal justice system in some way. We also opened it up to judges, prosecutors, prison wardens, anybody involved in the criminal justice system. So now we've grown from a speakers bureau of, say, half a dozen to more than 80 guys in 26 countries.
Wow. I guess one thing people tend to wonder is, you know, in light of where we've been with the war on drugs, one of my big concerns is that it's an example of the government not even caring what the rules are anymore. Because at least when we did alcohol prohibition in the early 1900s, we at least had the intellectual honesty to amend the Constitution. Because there's nowhere in the Constitution of the United States that the federal government has, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government the right or the ability to, in my mind, to prosecute a federal war on drugs.
Well, a lot of people like to put this back on, I think it was a case back in the mid-1940s that had to do with the Commerce Clause.
Right.
And that exploded, that became the plethora of laws that came out of Congress after that, and one of them is prosecuting the war on drugs. They didn't feel like they needed an amendment to the Constitution to deal with, to prohibit this substance.
Right.
So that's what Congress is writing on. And then of course we had the scheduling of drugs. That was fun.
So that was kind of surreal. So we were just standing there talking, and all of a sudden this pair of cops
I had my
pulls
back
into
to the street, and those guys were looking at us. Now they were wearing those. They were wearing. You know, I couldn't tell that they were cops when they were sitting out on the street looking at us and smiling at us until we walked in. And so there, he says, "Yeah, I want to know why cops say legalize drugs." Isn't that great?
So unfortunately, neither of them wanted to be on camera.
Right.
But we just had a fantastic conversation with 2 officers over here in Greensboro who had some really insightful and, I would say, common sense things to say that kind of mirror what you're saying.
They were saying, I mean, it was amazing the stuff that he was saying that is almost word for word what my speakers go out and speak to audiences. What makes the speakers so much fun in front of a Rotary Club or any other clubs, because they're not professional speakers. You know, they're just street cops like those 2 guys we were talking to. One guy, marijuana is a Class 1 drug, which is addictive with no medicinal value.
Right.
All right. That's what Class 1 is. Now, cocaine and heroin don't fall into that category.
Right.
All right, but marijuana is, and so but where would we classify, for instance, alcohol and tobacco? Show me the medicinal use in tobacco.
Right. And honestly, in terms of public health expenditures, in terms of impacts on individuals' health and well-being, alcohol and tobacco hurt a lot more people than the quote-unquote illegal drugs.
And tobacco is a very good thing to bring up because, okay, when the federal government decided to start, and the state government started doing as well, started focusing on the public health problems caused by tobacco use, all right? They did it by first education. You know, we got the little branding on the side of the packs. There was more public education in our schools. And then over the years, there was restrictive usage. Now, there's civil libertarians that would be opposed to the restrictive use that has been embraced by communities, like reducing use of tobacco in restaurants, even public buildings, public parks. I mean, there's even outdoor areas that are now being restricted where they won't let people smoke. Now, they're not saying you can't smoke. So what has happened in that, say, 40 to 50 years that we've been doing that? We've reduced tobacco use by 50%. And it's also, we have those tiny terrorists running around.
That's amazing.
Without making the product illegal, we've reduced adult use by 50%.
Which is why the tobacco companies are looking at Asia and China and all these other, and saying, hey, we need a growth market, we're going to go overseas because Americans aren't smoking as much anymore.
Exactly. So there's a prime example of a potentially dangerous product. And the way we dealt with it is not to prohibit it, because, and you will hear them say, well, gosh, if we prohibited cigarette smoking, we would be providing a commodity to for the black market, for drug cartels, for organized crime.
That's what we're doing.
That's exactly what we're doing with marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. So when we make this presentation to a Rotary, when our speakers go in and make this pitch to a church congregation, today, for instance, we're up in Alaska. We're doing a 2-week tour in Alaska. In 2 weeks, we're going to New Zealand. We're doing a 3.5-week tour in New Zealand. Next week, we'll be in doing a 4-day tour in Tampa, St. Petersburg. And then all across the United States, we're doing radio shows and newspaper interviews. And this is exactly the message we're making. We get on conservative talk radio at least once a week. And oftentimes, you know, we get a mix. Sometimes the hosts are supportive, or they'll say, my audience is going to love this topic and they're going to eat you alive. And the reality is, the audience loves the topic and they're all aboard and in support, just like those two cops were a while ago. So what we've got to show America is that this is a paper tiger. You know, I compare it to the Berlin Wall. Nobody predicted that thing was going to fall when it did. I mean, it just, suddenly it caught a lot of people by surprise. I think the same thing's going to happen with the war on drugs.
So, like, I don't. So how can you go out and talk to people about actually legalizing drugs? Doesn't that just seem crazy? Well, most people think that's crazy.
When I first started in '98, I felt the same thing. I thought I was going to get a response like, "There's no way you're coming to speak to my Rotary Club." But the reality is, they were very interested in what that word meant. You know, what do you guys mean by legalizing? So our speakers talk about, well, what does legalizing mean? And we start off by talking about policy. The word policy, what does that mean? And we talked probably about 5 or 10 minutes of what has been going on. And they've been seeing this. You can't watch the news any night of the week without seeing a story about this drug bust, or that crime statistic, or you know, or that overdose. So they want to know about it.
But you're not. You know, a lot of people think, all right, wait a minute. You're talking about heroin in Walmart on the corner aisles before you go through the checkout. So what are we talking about?
Good question. Well, first of all, you got to regulate it. To legalize it, you have to legalize it to be able to regulate and control it. Because right now, the people that are in charge of regulation and control are Al Capone and Osama bin Laden and the drug cartels in Colombia. So we want to control it and regulate it. And regulation means all kinds of things. I'd want to regulate. I want aspirin regulated differently than alcohol. Alcohol is regulated different than tobacco. We have age limitations, restrictions. We have hours of sale and places to sell. The drug dealer has none of that. All right. There is, for instance, Switzerland has had for 10 years now, and the public doesn't know about this because